Good evening, everybody. Hope you've had a marvelous day. It is time to get started with our announcements, and then Dan will lead us in a song, and then we'll pray and be dismissed to our Bible classes. We do have a few health updates. Angela Beck has an appointment with a neurologist on June 27th in Tulsa. Also, Brenda McFarland is scheduled for hip surgery June 22nd at Oklahoma Surgical Hospital in Tulsa. Also, remember the family of little Zane, 3-year-old Zane Snodgrass during this time. Also, Amber is scheduled for a C-section as soon as Zane is taken off of life support. Congratulations to Colby and Jordan Harden. They're the proud parents of daughter Harper Lane, born yesterday, weighing 5 pounds, 11 ounces. They live in Little Rock. Mom and baby are doing well. Grandparents Steve and Sandra Harden, and Mike Millam and Kim Millam. We do have some June birthdays. June 15th, Bob Townsend. The 17th, Brady West. The 18th, Carter Archer, Eva Glasner, Joe Carnes. The 19th, Larry Moore, Jerry Lee Walker, Sherry Young. Also on the 21st, Chris Branscombe, Jeff Walker, and Mike Watts. And June anniversaries include, on the 15th, Mike and Bobby Watts. June 17th, Kenny and Mona Lashley. The 19th, Jerry and Vicki Walker. The 20th, Brad and Jessica Garner, and Jerry and Susan Keeley. And the 21st, Roy and Mary Smith, and Bill and Diane Tipples. Also, the Fishers of Men, that's for grades 6 through 12 boys. The first meeting will be tomorrow evening. That'll be from 6 to 8 here at the building. Bring a couple of dollars for pizza and drinks. Soul Sisters will meet on Monday the 20th from 6 to 8. Cookies and cards. Meet at Janet Strain's. Also, Tuesday the 21st at 6 p.m. will be the covered dish dinner for the Over the Hill gang. And so enter through the kitchen door to be a part of that. Also, June 22nd at 11 o'clock here at the building will be the celebration of the life of Marvin Rockman. Also, there will be a men's ministry meeting on Sunday, June 26th at 4 p.m. here at the Fellowship Hall. This meeting is to continue the plans for the vision that began at the men's retreat. Also, there will be a Mom's Day Out coming up on the 28th from 9 to noon. And so that is for ages 4 to 11, so that the moms can have a day out. Somewhere else. So bring your wheels to the church building for that. Also, 6:30 at the church building on July 4th. You can sign up at the welcome booth for this. To bring ice cream or toppings, bring a lawn chair to stay to watch the school's fireworks display. And you're not supposed to bring fireworks here. Just watch them there, at least for that time period. And there will be an inflatable water slide and obstacle course as well. That might be another reason why we might not want to be shooting fireworks through the parking lot. Don't see any possible potential problems there. All right, Burnt Cabin's coming right up. July 17th through the 23rd for grades 3 through 12, those who've completed at least grades 3 through 12. And the theme is Take Your Stand. And man, this is shaping up to be a really, really super week of camp. We'll be looking at the life of Daniel. We'll also be looking at the armor of God in the evening, the stories of Daniel during the day for Bible class. And so I'm really looking forward to that. All the teachers have their lessons, and everyone's preparing to have a really, really good week of camp. And so I hope that if you're able to come to that you'll go ahead and get your registration forms turned in. by the 30th of this month, so that Janet will have enough time to get all those names in line and all that information just the way it should be. And also, that also helps us know numbers so that all the counselors can prepare and know how many supplies and so forth to bring. Also, it is summertime, and so we put the permission slips out before the end of the previous year, but we still have a lot of our youth that don't have a current permission slip in. So if you don't have a current permission slip on file with us, they are available at the youth booth. So please make sure that your 6th through 12th graders have permission slips and that they're up to date. And see Thomas Holton, and he'll be in the sound booth tonight with forms. They're also available at the sound booth. Okay, Dan.
Encamped along the hills of light, ye Christian soldiers, rise and press the battle ere the night shall veil the glowing skies. Against the foe in vales below, let all our strength be hurled. Faith is the victory we know that overcomes the world. Faith is the victory, faith is the victory. Oh, glorious victory that overcomes the world. His banner over us is love, our sword the word of God. We tread the road the saints above with shouts of triumph trod. By faith they like a whirlwind's breath swept on o'er every field. The faith by which they conquered death is still our shining shield. Faith is the victory, faith is the victory. Oh, glorious victory that overcomes the world. To him that overcomes the foe, white raiment shall be given. Before the angels he shall know his name confessed in heaven. Then onward from the hills of light, our hearts with love aflame, will vanquish all the host of night through Jesus' conquering name. Faith is the victory, faith is the victory. Oh, glorious victory that overcomes the world.
Let's bow, please. Dear God, we love you very much, and we just want to let you know how much we appreciate you, how in awe we are of your greatness, your mercy, your love, your faithfulness. You never turn your back on us. You always are with us through all the ups and downs of life, and we're so thankful for that. It's such a comfort that we have you as our Heavenly Father, and that you get us through the storms of life. God, we just pray that you'd be with all those who are suffering various illnesses, sicknesses, times of life that are just very difficult to go through right now. God, I just pray that you would be with those who are on our health update list, that you would be with Angela Beck, also Brenda McFarland, and that you would be with all the family of little Zane during this very difficult time for their family, and that you would just bless them with peace during just a tragic time. That you would be with Amber and in the upcoming birth of her baby. God, I just pray that you would be with little Harper Lane, and we're so thankful for that birth. And we celebrate with Colby and Jordan and all their family, with Steve and Sandra and everyone. We just pray that you would be with that little girl, and that she would be raised to love and obey you all the days of her life. God, I just thank you for all the ways that you bless us as your church, as spiritual family members here, that you would just bless us with the desire, the ability, the desire to continue to unify and to grow in love and grow in knowledge and grow in wisdom as we honor you with everything that we have as we go through this life, as we strive our best to bring other people closer to your Son. It's in his name we pray. Amen. You're dismissed to class.
Tonight I want us to continue our look at different translations of the Bible and some study helps when it comes to studying the Bible. I think it appropriate before we spend some time looking at the book itself, doing our year in the book, which will begin shortly. I think it's very helpful to know something of the background of how we got the Bible, of what translations might be helpful, and of some study helps that I think you will also find to be of great benefit when it comes to studying the Bible. And so I want to begin tonight by looking at making a discussion of the different translations of Scripture to begin with. I think it was Doug Ham who pointed out to us Sunday that there are, I believe he said, 5,000 different languages that still don't have a Bible in their language. On the other hand, we in America, speaking English, are blessed with a plethora of translations, dozens and dozens of them that we have available to us. Excellent translations. And so, how'd that come about? What's the difficulty in translations? What are some good ones and bad ones and this kind of thing? That's what I want us to spend some time talking about this evening. First of all, let me go into why do we have a need for newer translations? I mean, I've heard people, ever since I started preaching, well, King James is good enough for Grandma and Grandpa. King James is good enough for me. Why do we need translations newer than the King James? That's a legitimate question, okay? And as I've said before, I have no big problems at all with King James Version. There are a lot of people that have gone to heaven knowing that King James Version, studying it all their lives. I've got passages in my head where I was raised as a kid that are still King James because that's what I learned on and chewed on when I was a little one. But that doesn't mean that there aren't better, more modern translations now available to us than the King James. Remember that the King James Version was at one time a new translation. People forget that. And as I said, I've been amazed at some of the people who think that, well, didn't this translation come from the Apostle James or something like that? No, not at all. Okay, this came from King James, who reigned back in the 17th century, okay? It was his brainchild, his idea, but it first came up again in 1611, all right? But as I pointed out to you, I think last week, it was 50 years, folks, from the time that the King James translation was done until people in the British Isles accepted it. there were a lot of folks, particularly in Scotland and other places, that did not like the King James Version and didn't want any part of it because it was a new translation. And so new is relative, you know. It's been around for us for a long time, but at one time it too was a new translation. As I pointed out to you, I think last week, this is very important. English is a living language. Word meanings and usages change over time. We talked a little bit about this last week, but it's very important. We do not speak King James English. If you had in your hands an original King James Bible, which you don't, we don't really see original versions of the King James anymore. They're revisions of revisions of revisions, even of the old King James. You would have a very difficult time reading it and understanding it. Because in the last 500 years or so, language has changed a lot. Word meanings have changed a great deal. And so it's important to understand that, now, there are some languages that are dead, okay? Latin is considered a dead language. Greek, Koine Greek, the Greek that the Bible was written in, is a dead language. That means it's fixed, it's not going to change, it's not evolving. That's advantageous in some ways, like for us in studying the Greek text of the New Testament. That's helpful because those words mean what they mean. They've meant that for a long time. But when it comes to English, man, it's not that way. Our language is changing all the time. And so if we're going to keep up with that, there's going to be times when we need to come up with translations that reflect the change in language. And again, simple things. When's the last time you heard thee or thou outside of a prayer? We just don't thee and thou it anymore, do we? And there's lots of little idiosyncrasies like that that are found in the King James. Nothing wrong with them at all. We just don't talk that way anymore. Research and scholarship have improved our knowledge of the Greek language a lot in the last 400 or 500 years. We talked about last week, we now have better, by better I mean older manuscripts of the Old Testament. We have multitudinous more manuscripts of the New Testament than they had, and thus we have what they call a cleaner text now to work from than they had 400 years ago. We now have more an older text available than when the King James Version was translated. And there is a constant challenge to frame a translation to meet different cultural age and educational levels. That's a big deal. NIV is written basically to be read on an 8th grade level. Most of the modern translations shoot for somewhere in there. King James is archaic enough and complicated enough that actually you need a better education to read the King James now than you do the NIV. But it is a challenge to make translations that are acceptable to people based on their educational level. That's one of the reasons why we see so many different translations. There's a translation, for instance, for the deaf that is, I think, just a pretty cool translation, but it's very basic, very, very simple. The sentence structure and all that are very, very simple. But I think they do a really good job of bringing over the sense of the Greek and Hebrew into English for people who can't hear, and thus have a bigger challenge when it comes to reading and comprehension. Now, what makes a good translation? Well, I would urge you to look for these 3 keys. Number one, did they have good text from which to translate? Now remember, I pointed out to you, 400 years ago, 500 years ago, most of the translations that were done into English at that time were not done from Hebrew and Greek texts. They were done from the Latin Vulgate, because that's what they had to work with. And so what we had early on for English translations were a translation of a translation. Today, we're blessed with all kinds of Hebrew and Greek texts that go way back, that enable us to get closer and closer to, again, what we call the autographa, to Paul's letter that he actually signed, and so on, as far as the accuracy of the text goes. That's very important. If we're interested in knowing exactly what God said, the older and the better text we have, the closer we can come to that. Secondly, is there a sound philosophy of translation? I'm going to talk more about this in a little bit. What are you trying to do with your translation? You say, what do you mean? Well, we'll talk about that, because different people have different goals in regard to what they're translating. And thirdly, make sure that it's the work of a committee. Now, I'm really big on this. I've got nothing against individual translations. Brother Hugo McCord, one of our brethren, did a translation that's really good, but it's one man's translation. Some of you may have Bibles that have like 4 translations and parallels in it. One of those translations often is Phillips' translation. That's a translation by one guy. And again, it's a good translation, but it's a translation by one fellow. If you take and you put 100 minds together, 120 minds together, you are going to come up with a better translation, simply because you have the expertise of all these individuals combined together. And if you've ever been around any of these guys, they're like super bright and deeply into this stuff, and they'll fight over a preposition. Sometimes writing letters back and forth and arguing over, should we translate this way or this way? So you're really guaranteed to get about as accurate a translation as you could possibly get when you have committees that are translating these books. Now, again, some things to be watchful for when it comes to translations. One, again, I want to warn against is single author works. Again, Living Bible, ones like that are single individual translators. Don't use those as your Bible. As a commentary, as a help, something like that, I got no problem with that, but not as your primary text. And secondly, and you need to watch out for this, do they have in this translation a theological axe to grind? For instance, if you've ever studied with the Jehovah's Witness, they really want to use their New World Translation. Okay, the reason is because it's really not a translation. To me, it's an abomination, because what they've done is gone in, and where the Greek text doesn't agree with their theology, they just ignore the text and translate it the way they want it to say, not what it says. And so, for instance, they will translate, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was a God. That article's not in there. Not in there. They just added it because it fits their theology. So you need to be careful, because different religious points of view at times will have their own translation that they like to use, and if you let them use it, it's going to say things that God really didn't say, but that they want it to say, okay? Also, increasingly, and you've heard me gripe about this on a multitude of occasions, are these new translations that want to be gender correct, which just drives me crazy. If God wanted to be addressed as mother or parent or whatever, he could have easily called himself that, and he didn't. He's speaking of his Father. And he didn't send his child, and it was his child, but he sent his Son. He's very specific about that it's his Son. And when you start editing God, to me, you're walking in areas that we don't need to walk, okay? I don't want to stand before God and answer for editing well, God, you should have said it this way. You really didn't get the gender correct in this now, kind of a thing. So some of the more modern translations, they want to take out son and they want to take out father and they want to substitute, just like we find the PC people trying to change our English and the way we address each other. Don't buy into that. Just don't go along with that. It's not justified for multiple reasons. As we go, by the way, man, if you've got questions, please just go, and I will seek to answer. Okay, styles of translations. There are different styles. I mentioned that earlier, and I want you to be aware of this. There are different types of translations. Really, there's three, basically, different types of translations you come across. The first is blank, there we go. The first is literal translations. Now, examples of this, and I'll talk more about these in detail in a little while, are like the American Standard Version, the Revised Standard Version, the New American Standard Version, the English Standard Version. Anytime you run across the word standard in the title of the translation, and notice, all of those have standard in the title, that means that this is an attempt to translate the Greek and the Hebrew as close to the original and as accurately and literally as possible. Okay? Now that means generally that the word order and the structure is going to be a little more grammatically challenging. It's going to require a little higher level, reading level, skill level to follow it, okay, than some of the other translations that try to simplify that. Okay, but this is an attempt to render the Greek and the Hebrew as close as possible in English, okay? A second is called a free translation. That's your Living Bible. Probably you've seen the Cotton Patch version and translations such as that. These assume, really to me, these are more commentaries than they are translations. They're not, and they shouldn't be viewed as a translation, because this is somebody taking the Greek or the Hebrew and trying to make it as idiomatic as possible, but they kind of go overboard on that. So again, helpful, okay, but don't use that as your study Bible, please. And then thirdly, they're what are called the dynamic equivalent translations. And these attempt to be idiomatic. That is, these translations seek to render the sense of the words from one language to another. And I'm going to give you some examples of this in a little bit. Okay, it's a real challenge to try to do this. The NIV, for instance, is an idiomatic translation. They're trying to take and translate the sense of what's said in the Greek, not necessarily literally what is said in the Greek. And I'll give you some examples of this, but that's the three different types. Okay, literal, the standard versions, the free, which is almost a commentary, and the dynamic equivalent, like the NIV, which is a real challenge and attempt to try to bring the meaning of the Greek over into English in a way that closely approximates what the Greek meant, or the Hebrew. Question? Okay. Now, what are some of the challenges that translators face? And there's a bunch. Okay? For instance, how about translating weights and measures and money? How do you translate that? And different translations approach it in different ways. Some translations will go ahead and, for instance,
talk about baths and homers and ephahs. And they won't translate into gallons or quarts or bushels or that kind of thing. They'll stick with the literal words that were used in the original language. Others will go ahead, like the NIV, and again, because it's idiomatic, and try to bring that over into the equivalent in English. So, for instance, in Isaiah 5, verse 10, reference will be made to a bath, to an omer, and to an ephah. Now, depending on your translation, it may read that way. If you're looking at one of the idiomatic translations, they may translate a bath as 6 gallons. Okay, a bath is 6 gallons. That's quite a bit of fluid, isn't it? But that's a bath. A bath is 6 gallons. An omer is 6 bushels. And an ephah is 3/5 of a bushel. And so some of the translations will go ahead and translate that in terms of gallons or bushels or whatever. Others will not. In Matthew 18, 24 and 28, here's another example. By the way, it should be verse 28, not verse 26. Whoever typed that, I can't believe they made that mistake, but they did. That should be verse 28. But when you look at that, that's where, remember, this servant comes to the king and begs for this huge debt he has to be forgiven. And the king forgives it, and then he turns around, and here comes this other compatriot of this servant, and he owes him a little bit of money, and he refuses to accept or to forgive the debt. And then the friends go back to the king and say, do you know what this guy did? And the king calls him in and says, you're going to pay the full price for everything. Now, he is said to owe 10,000 talents. Wow. Okay, so how do you translate that? Well, some will translate 10,000 talents. What is a talent? Well, it is kind of, sort of, maybe, depending on the value of the dollar, 20 years' wages. That's a lot of money, isn't it? If you owe 10,000 talents, take 10,000 times 20 years worth of wages. You understand why the guy owes a debt he could never, ever repay. That's the point that Jesus is making. This huge amount of money. Versus this other fella who happens to owe him 100 denarii. They're called. A denarius is 1 day's wage. 1 day's wage. World of difference between 100 days' wages and 10,000 times 20 years worth of wages. Jesus is making a point. You're asking God to forgive you this huge debt, and when someone does you wrong, you're going, oh, I can't let that go. I can't forgive that. When you compare them, there is no comparison. If you want God to forgive you, you better be ready to forgive others. That's his point. But it kind of gets lost unless you have some idea of the amount of money that we're talking about. I guarantee you the Jew's jaws dropped when he uses this example, because this is an incredible amount of money. This is more than a king's ransom. King Herod and those guys, they did not begin to have 10,000 talents. Okay? That's an unfathomable amount of money in that day and age. Now, how do you translate? Here's another one that's a real challenge. How do you translate euphemisms? Now, what is a euphemism? Everybody know what a euphemism is? Well, that's wordplay. A euphemism is substituting one word for another. Okay? And so, we don't say he died. We'll say what? He passed on. Right? Or something like that. That's a euphemism. He passed on. Well, in the Bible, there are times when the translators face a real challenge in how to translate something. Let me give you a couple of kind of touchy examples. Genesis 31:35. Laban is really upset because someone has stolen his household gods. And he comes after Jacob. And he wants whoever did this to pay. And Jacob says, yeah, they need to pay. Who stole them? Rachel did. And Rachel's hiding them. So how does Rachel get away with that? Well, the translations will say something like, she will say, the way of women is upon me. She's having her period. That's what she's saying. But do you translate that? Now, today, that's such common language that most people wouldn't be shocked by that or upset by that. But a couple hundred years ago, that was pretty touchy. How do you translate that? And so euphemistically, they would be challenged to come up with the way of women is upon me or something like that. In 2 Samuel chapter 13, verse 14, Amnon has sexually attacked Tamar. Okay? The word in Hebrew is pretty graphic. He's raped her. But do you translate rape there? Or do you translate, like some translations do, he had violated her? And so, how literal do you want to be? How do you handle euphemisms like that? Okay? It's a challenge. Depends on your audience, depends on the time, this kind of thing. Okay, vocabulary. Big challenge here. There are many Hebrew and Greek words that have various shades of meaning. One that I've talked to you about several times is perosmos, which can be translated, it's not up there, but just as an example, it can be translated as tempt or try. Well, you just have to look at the word in context, and the translator has to decide, does he mean try here or tempt here? You go to James, count it all joy when you encounter manifold perosmoi. You encounter manifold, is that when you encounter manifold trials? Or when you encounter manifold temptations? And we've talked about, sometimes it's hard to separate out the difference between a temptation and a trial. A trial can be a temptation, and a temptation can be a trial. Okay? So how do you translate the word? Well, again, the translators have to sit down and duke it out and talk about it and think about it and look how it's used in other places and try to go, okay, I think here it should be translated trial and here it should be translated tempt. But it's a challenge. Okay? Now, I've given you a couple more examples here. Sarx. Sarx means flesh. Okay? The Latin would translate this as carne. Okay, when you have chili con carne, what do you have? Chili with flesh, chili with meat. Okay, sarx is the word for flesh, meat. Now, as you look at translations of sarx, it will translate like flesh, sinful nature, human nature. One of the big differences, for instance, in like the NASV, the New American Standard Version, and the NIV, being idiomatic, it will, sarx, flesh, NASV will just translate flesh, fleshy. NIV will translate sinful nature. Well, now who's right? Well, both are. Because what he's talking about is the fact that our flesh pulls us to do bad things, sinful nature. But the word itself literally is just flesh. Okay? It can also talk about a worldly point of view. Paul will say, I wish you were spiritual, but you're sarxy. You're fleshy. Now, again, how do you translate that? Well, you're what? Worldly? you're looking at things in an improper kind of a way through a lens you shouldn't be looking at it through. How do you translate your fleshy? Well, that's the kind of challenge you face when you're looking at translating words like sarx. Pneuma, which we get spirit, breath. What is something that is pneumatic? A pneumatic drill is what? It's an air-driven drill, right? Air-driven drill, okay? Pneuma, spirit in the New Testament. Paul will, in Romans 1 verse 9, he'll speak of God whom I serve in my pneuma, whom I serve in my spirit. NIV will translate that, whom I serve with my whole heart. Now who's right? If he serves him in his spirit, if he serves him in the innermost part of his being, if he serves him from the core of who he is he serving him with his whole heart? Well, yeah, he is. Okay? And so some translations will translate like, for instance, ESV will translate spirit. Other translations will translate like NIV, whole heart. Because again, they're trying to get back to trying to convey the sense of the word instead of literally the word. And so there you get into some real issues, see, and challenges. That's why reading multiple translations, I believe, is very important to really get a feel for what the text says. Grammar and syntax. How many of you loved English? That's what I thought. A few. You're rare birds, you know. English can be very confusing, can it? And complicated. Any language, when you begin to look at grammar and syntax, Greek, all kinds of tenses and this kind of thing in it that we don't use. Okay, but here's an example of the problem. 1 Corinthians 3:16 and 6:13, if you'll look at those verses, both of them speak of you. You. But in one, it's you singular, and in another one, it's you in the sense of y'all. Now, Southerners have got this down, and I really think it's good English. Because if I say y'all, then y'all know what I'm talking about. Versus if I say you ought to do this, probably I'm referring in a singular sense to y'all versus y'all. Well, there is no Greek y'all. Okay, it's just you. And so they have to decide whether that's singular or plural, whether it's you or y'all. Okay? That's the kind of thing you're going to run into anytime you translate from one language to another. There's going to be problems like that. Another example of this, Ephesians 1 through 14, in the original Greek is one sentence. Now, in your English Bibles, I guarantee it's not one sentence. Some of them, you get back to the ASV, some of the earlier standard translations, and there'll be some long sentences in there. But it's one sentence in the original Greek. You try to translate that into one sentence in English, you get cross-eyed trying to get through all of it. Okay? And so we break it down into separate sentences in our English translations. That's the kind of thing you're going to run into, okay, when you start translating from one language to another. Some of the challenges that you're going to face. And so different translators are going to go at that differently. It's important that you understand that. And I don't know, honestly, I don't know that there's a right or a wrong in a lot of that. And that's why, again, I think it's important that when you study, you use various translations. Carol will tell you, I'll have 3 or 4 different translations laid out on my desk in front of me when I'm studying a passage, because I want to know what various translators have translated that passage to say. Because that's very helpful, because you go, well, wait a minute, that's way different than this. Why is that? You get to dig in and find out. Or, That's an interesting way of putting it, different than what they put it. That's the value of having these different translations. Now, some of the more modern, popular translations, just kind of let me sketch those out for you. Probably you've already got a Bible that you use most of the time, that you carry, that you study from. Great. No problem. I'm not telling you to change. Okay? Maybe I am. You may find one you like better. But let me just touch on a few of them. The American Standard Version, this was translated back in 1901. It's a revision of the English Revised Version. It was done by a team of 65 scholars in England, along with 2 American groups. It is very literal. Very literal. When I started at Sunset in the school preaching back in early 71, that was the translation that we used. It's really good translation. It's really stilted English, okay? Because when you start translating as literally as possible, it's pretty awkward in construction. But if you want a translation that's probably about as close to the Greek or Hebrew as you're going to find, the ASV is it, all right? I still got one, and I pull it out every once in a while, okay? American Standard Version. You'll have to order it special probably, because they just don't print them anymore, okay? It's hard to find. Jim? Yes.
It's a lot like reading King James.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, then the Revised Standard Version. This was done immediately post-World War II. The New Testament coming out in 46, the Old Testament in 52. Revised Standard Version has been used a lot in our Christian colleges. If you went through a number of the Christian colleges back in the 60s and 70s, probably they were using the Revised Standard Version. It seeks to be more of a dynamic equivalent in translation rather than a literal rendering, but it is still considered a standard version. And so the language isn't as stilted as the American Standard. The language is smoother. The grammar is smoothed out. And it's not a bad translation at all. One that's not used as much as it was 30, 40 years ago, but still considered to be a good translation. New American Standard Version. New Testament came out in 63, Old Testament in 70. I used that for years. The whole time that I was in Portales nearly, I used that. Used it for several years when I was at Sunset until I found out that nobody else was using it. And everybody else was using the NIV. And at that point, I switched to the NIV because people kept asking me, what version are you using? Because it ain't the same as mine. So NASV, they just took the American Standard Version and tried to update the English and smooth it out. Good translation. Our Steve Parker still uses NASV. Good translation. Then the New International Version. The New Testament came out in 73. The Old Testament came out in 70. Another very, 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 very popular translation used by a ton of people. And I remember when it first came out, I was fascinated. It's the first idiomatic translation that I'd come across. And I thought, this is the berries. I loved it. Okay? And it is a good translation. Now again, the newer version of this, they've tried to get gender correct and that kind of thing, and I don't like it at all. Okay, but the old one was a good translation. And then the one I use now, and a number of you use now, and it's used a lot now in Churches of Christ. There. Thank you. Is that me or Thomas? It's Thomas who did it. That's English Standard Version. English Standard Version came out in 2001. It's done by a team of 100 scholars. It's based on the most recent text, and I really like it. I really like it. I think it's very good. One of the better modern translations that are out there. Okay, any questions? All right, let me do a little nuts and bolts thing here real quick. Okay, here are 4 Bibles that I use fairly often. This is my ESV that I consider my pulpit Bible. It has a small concordance in it. It's basically just a pulpit Bible. This is called the Archaeological Study Bible. It's a specialty Bible. It has its focus is on giving you the archaeological background of events as they occur in the Old and New Testaments. I find that fascinating and helpful. You may find that boring as all get out and could care less. I would understand, okay? But it's full of notes, full of special studies. I find it very helpful. It's not my study Bible, but I pull it down a lot, particularly when I'm messing around in the Old Testament. I like it. One of these, this is the NIV Study Bible. This is the ESV Study Bible. I would really recommend, if you all don't have one or the other, that you get one or the other. Seriously. To me, these are by far the most helpful, practical Bibles that are out there. Now, when you get a study Bible like this English Standard Version study Bible, you get an outline of each book before you get to the book itself. It gives you an outline of the book, give you introductory notes to the book, let you know when it was written, who wrote it, why it was written, some examination of the contents of it, a good summary and analysis of it. And then it will have your center references so that you can cross-reference from one verse to another verse to another verse and so on, which is very helpful. And then down at the bottom, as you'll see, at the bottom you've got notes. And so anything that needs to be explicated, explained, or looked at in some detail, the people who translated this and then who did these notes, you'll have this at the bottom. Very, very helpful. You won't always agree with it. You got to spit some bones out occasionally, but very, very helpful. Okay? And whether it's the English Standard Version of this or the NIV, both of them are very helpful. At the back, this one has a very good concordance, has a bunch of maps, has special studies in it, has charts in it that are very, very helpful. And so, bang for your buck, man, it's like you're buying a library. Now, it's a library that weighs 5 pounds, and I don't know that you want to carry it around all the time. But for the bang for the buck, this is really hard to beat. Get one of these study Bibles. I'm serious. Really, really good stuff. Okay, now, you can buy different, and you'll notice this is hardback, all right? This is real leather. This is bonded leather, okay? You're going to pay for the binding. Get a hardback, it's going to be way cheaper than if you get bonded leather, which is going to be way cheaper than if you get real leather. Okay? And that's because of the durability of the cover. This one, this is real leather. Okay? Theoretically, it should last forever. Now you can see I've worn it enough that the black's worn off and it's showing some wear on it here because of the way I handle it and carry it. But the leather part of it, if you get bonded leather, it's going to crack, break, and fall apart. Okay, just be ready. I didn't bring them, but I've got one Bible, a New American Standard Version, that I've had rebound 3 times, and an NIV that I've had rebound twice. Okay, because what happens is the cover will hold up, but the paste that they use back here, the glue and the sewing, and all will start to fall apart, and pages will start falling out. That's a little annoying, and so you have to take it and you have to get it rebound. Okay, so if you really love it, that's the good thing about it. You can get these rebound and use them for decade after decade after decade. At some point, probably your paper will begin to yellow and that kind of thing, but that doesn't mean that you still won't be able to use it. And I love to be able to pick it up and go, okay, I know that verse is on this page, over on this side, down in this corner, over here, because you've used it enough. That's helpful. Wow, real quickly, let me zip through this. Bible study helps. Concordances. I would strongly urge you, if you do not have an electronic concordance, if you've got a computer, get you an electronic concordance. My. You need an electronic concordance. And you can get them for free. This one, eSword, is free. And it has all kinds of helps, and it is excellent. It really is. It'll have Bible dictionaries, Bible encyclopedia. It'll let you search for words. It'll let you look at Greek stuff if you want to, and it's free. Now, he'll ask you for a donation, and I gave him one because the guy that put this together did a fabulous job, but you can download it for nothing, and it is worth way more than nothing. Okay, it's really, really, really helpful. So if you don't have an electronic concordance, I would strongly urge you to get something like eSword. Bible dictionaries and encyclopedias, like I said, eSword has several available for use. That's great. When you're wondering, well, just what was a Sadducee? I can't remember. Well, man, if you can pop a dictionary out and look it up, or a Pharisee or whatever, what was in the scene, what was this, what was that, those are super helpful. Maps and atlases. Those are also, I've got probably 6 different Bible maps and atlas books, which are super when you're studying, particularly in the Old Testament, but even during Paul's visits, for instance. Where in the world is Syria? And where was Phrygia? And he wanted to go into Bithynia. What in the world was Bithynia? And where's Corinth? And this kind of thing. Well, you can whip out one of those atlases and look that up and find out exactly where it was. If you have a good study Bible, it'll be in your study Bible. And you'll have those maps there. And they're very, very handy. Word studies, these are helpful. You can buy these in one volume. A couple that I really like are Vines and Vincent's. And you can get those again in one volume. And those simply, like you want to look up a word like flesh. Okay? Look up flesh and it'll tell you all the different meanings of the word flesh and where they're used in the Scripture. It's very helpful, very concise, and a good study tool. Use it all the time. And then commentaries. Now you have 2 different kinds really. I'll call them textual and devotional. The textual commentaries, those are more technical. They're giving you, the interpretation, the meaning of the text and background of the text and word studies and blah, blah, blah. Word, New International, College Press Suite. Those are different types of commentaries that you can get. Some, like, for instance, Word and New International, are much, much more technical than College Press and Suite. College Press and Suite are much easier to use and follow. And then devotional, those will be like Wiersbe's B-books and Barclay's commentaries. Very, very helpful, not only to give you the meaning of the text, but to take and make application of the text in various ways. Okay? So, hope that helps. God bless. Have a great week. Yeah? Huh? A lot of them are in the library in there. Yes, they are. Thank you.